The MCM Elegante Hotel in Beaumont, Texas is a simple but good place to stay. As the hours pass, the hotel becomes quieter. Most guests retire to their rooms to let the evening draw to a close. This is also the case for the occupant of room 348. He is lying on his hotel room bed, enjoying a root beer and a chocolate bar, smoking and watching a movie. He had actually wanted to make popcorn in the room's microwave. However, not only the fuse of his own room, but also that of his neighbor's room blew. After a quick phone call with the hotel reception, he decides to simply do without the popcorn and have a relaxing movie night. The blockbuster Iron Man 2 flickers across the screen of his TV. For the hotel guest, September 15th, 2010 could have been a normal, quiet evening if he hadn't died within a few seconds. On the morning of September 11th, 2010, two men arrive at the front desk of the MCM Elegante Hotel. They explain that they have just knocked on room 348. The room is currently occupied by a colleague of theirs. That morning, his wife had called the office and was worried because she couldn't reach her husband. So the colleagues went to the hotel to check. But the occupant of room 348 does not open his door. The staff offers to check. When a hotel manager opens the door with his staff key, he is confronted with a terrible sight. Right outside the door, on the carpet of the room, lies a dead man. A half-smoked cigarette is still clamped between his stiff fingers. He is lying on his stomach, and his skin has already taken on a grayish-bluish tinge. It is unusually stuffy in room 348. All the windows are closed. After the dead man is discovered, the police are alerted immediately. The forensic team takes a close look at the hotel room and finds nothing. There are no signs of forced entry on the windows or doors, no blood spatter or other signs of a struggle. And all of the dead man's valuables also appear to be there. In his trouser pockets, there are a few $100 bills, a total of over $1,000 in cash. A potential robber would not have wanted to miss out on that. The residents of the surrounding hotel rooms are asked if they saw or heard anything unusual the night before. No luck, though. No one heard a sound coming from room 348. The dead man's name is Greg Flanagan. He is 55 years old, has been a chain smoker for many years, does not pay attention to his physical fitness, and never goes to doctors. As shocked as his relatives may be by his sudden death, no one is really surprised at first. Greg had a rather unhealthy lifestyle, which now seems to have been his undoing. The police officers who are on the scene initially also assume that it was a natural death. A sad routine case, which is unfortunate, but not unusual. Greg Flanagan's story could have ended there, if the forensic doctor in charge hadn't carried out his work with meticulous precision. Because during the autopsy, he makes a discovery that many other experts would have overlooked. A discovery that changes everything. The first thing you notice is a small abrasion on the dead man's cheek. But this is easy to explain. Greg was found lying on his front on the carpet, so he probably sustained this wound when he fell. But there is a second wound that cannot be easily explained. It is in Greg's private parts. There is a laceration about 5 millimeters long on his testicle, with fluid leaking out. Something or someone must have hit Greg hard, with a punch or a kick, because a large hematoma has spread from this point over his groin and right hip. Although the police initially found no obvious injuries at the scene, the detailed autopsy of the dead man paints a different picture. Greg had even more injuries, especially internal ones. There is a large amount of blood in his torso, as well as partially digested food. He has 2 broken ribs, and his heart has also been damaged. The coroner is therefore certain that Greg Flanagan did not die a natural death, as initially suspected. The dead man from room 348 was beaten or crushed to death, and by external influence. When the Beaumont police force found out about this, they were faced with a big mystery. Although the body of Greg Flanagan shows severe injuries, room 348 at the MCM Elegante Hotel does not look like a crime scene. There are no signs of forced entry or struggle. The doors and windows are properly closed, and there is no indication that Greg Flanagan could have had company on the evening of September 10th. Only the patio door is open a crack and not fully latched. Furthermore, with the exception of the tiny lacerations on the face and testicle and the hematoma, the injuries are exclusively internal. How could someone or something have injured Greg Flanagan so severely without leaving more marks on his body, especially in the sensitive upper body area? And there is something else that is strange. Greg's widow says that he always had the air conditioning on and only slept in cold rooms. So why was the air conditioning turned off and the room so warm and stuffy when he was found? None of this made sense yet. As a young man, Greg initially worked as an offshore engineer, but after several years at sea, he reoriented himself. Greg took a job with an oil and gas exploration company. Together with his brother Michael, Greg leases oil fields in the U.S. state of Texas. This means he is also a regular at the MCM in Beaumont. There, near the Gulf Coast, he is very close to the oil refineries he looks after professionally. Greg therefore regularly rents a hotel room in a separate area of the complex, with its own swimming pool and small garden, through the company he runs with his brother. He usually withdraws to his hotel room. He has no interest in hanging out with other guests at the bar or by the pool. Instead, he stays in his room by himself, smokes and eats a few sweets, watches a movie, and goes to bed early. During the day, he goes to work and attends business meetings. The police have no leads. Greg Flanagan appears to be what one would commonly call a model citizen. A quiet, educated guy who earns well, is reserved and down to earth, and has a long-standing marriage with his wife. Not only do the Beaumont police find no suspect in the killing of Greg Flanagan, they don't even find a motive. From the investigators' point of view, Greg's life is almost frustratingly unspectacular. The most unusual thing is the power outage that Greg accidentally caused on the evening of his death. When he wanted to make microwave popcorn in room 348, a fuse blew. The fuse in the neighboring room, 349, also blew, as did the fuse in the room below. Because of this incident, Greg had phoned the reception on the evening of September 10th, who sent the caretaker over. And sure enough, the hotel's caretaker does have a criminal record for a felony. Coupled with Greg's injury in the genital area, this is an initial clue, but it is quickly dismissed, because there is no further evidence or proof that would incriminate the caretaker in any way. Instead, the police focus on the neighbors from room 349. They were also affected by the brief power outage caused by Greg. At the time of Greg's death, the room is occupied by a couple of electricians. They are working for another oil company. Normally, only 2 electricians live in the room, but 3 others occupy a room at the end of the corridor. However, after work, they often sit together in one of the rooms and have a beer. This was also the case on the evening of September 10th. However, none of them heard anything, except for a slight cough from Greg's room when the electricians just came back from the hotel bar. That's not unusual. Greg's widow confirms that Greg had a severe smoker's cough, so again, nothing that helps the police in any way. The death of Greg Flanagan becomes more and more mysterious. Because even after days, weeks, and finally months, the investigators have no coherent picture. Greg's family even offers a reward of $50,000 and hires private detectives. One of these private detectives, Ken Brennan, seeks direct contact with the responsible police in Beaumont. Both parties decide to work together. So, months after Greg's death, all the files are reviewed and the crime scene is inspected. The private detective notices a crucial detail: the room temperature. Although Greg always ran the air conditioning, it was turned off when his body was found. The only thing that could explain this is the power outage that Greg caused on the night of his death. The air conditioning would have also been turned off. And after that, Greg could have simply forgotten to turn it back on. It would have taken a few minutes for him to notice from the rising room temperature. But not too long, because it is very warm along the Gulf Coast in Texas. The caretaker left Greg's room at around 8:30 p.m., so Greg must have died shortly after that, before he could even notice that the air conditioner was off. Thus, the police and the private investigator can now roughly determine the time of death for the first time. Based on his injuries, it can also be assumed that Greg died quickly, within a few seconds of the violent blows or kicks. Since he is lying on the carpet right outside the door and there are no signs of a struggle in the room, private investigator Brennan and the police developed the following hypothesis. Someone came to room 348 and knocked. Greg opened the door and was attacked with such force that he died instantly. It still remains to be determined who this person might have been. And this consideration leads the investigators once more back to the electricians in the neighboring room. The two units decide to conduct new, more extensive witness interviews. This time, not only the 5 electricians will be interviewed, but also all their colleagues. Because with 5 people, there is a high probability that one of the 5 may have told other colleagues something that could be relevant to the police. At first, the interviews are rather frustrating. One of the colleagues says he has heard rumors that Greg Flanagan was shot in the hotel. At first, the police and Ken Brennan think the colleague is confusing another case. But they check the rumor out and it brings them a decisive step closer to solving the mystery. When room 348 is meticulously examined again, a small hole is found in the wall. It is barely visible to the naked eye. It is located at waist height, right next to the entrance door, and looks more like a small notch, as if the doorknob had repeatedly hit the wall there. But when the investigators also check the neighboring room 349, where the electricians were staying, in the same place, they find a bullet hole that has been provisionally filled with toothpaste. So someone shot through the wall from room 349, and the bullet exited in room 348, at waist height, right next to the entrance door. When the line of fire is measured using the tiny hole through the wall, investigators can even determine where the bullet went, right in the direction of the bed in room 348. The bed where Greg had been sitting until a few minutes before his death, watching Iron Man 2 on the evening of September 10th. Together with the forensic pathologist who performed the autopsy on Greg Flanagan, the police and the private investigator go over the photos from the autopsy again. And with the new knowledge that Greg Flanagan may have been shot, a whole new picture of the injuries emerges. The half-centimeter laceration on Greg's testicle was not a laceration at all, but a bullet hole. The 55-year-old must have been lying on the bed when the shot from room 349 hit him right there, through the wall. The bullet traveled through his torso, causing internal bleeding and ultimately the injury to his heart. Greg Flanagan was not beaten to death as previously thought. The 55-year-old was shot. 7 months after the death of Greg Flanagan, the electricians from room 349 are being questioned again. The 2 men who mainly occupied the room next to Greg's are Tim Steinmetz and Lance Miller. The two are surprised when the police contact them again after so many months. But just as before, they are very cooperative and come to the re-examination immediately. Both initially stick to their story and say that they were sitting together on the evening of September 10th, but didn't hear anything apart from the coughing coming from Greg's room. But when Tim Steinmetz is confronted by the police, he breaks down. He tells them what really happened on the evening of Greg Flanagan's death. He spent the evening in room 349 with his colleague Lance and another colleague named Trent Pisano. They drank beer at first, and later whiskey. Trent had a gun with him. Lance then started playing around with it, pointing it at Tim and then at Trent as a joke. A shot was fired. The bullet missed Trent by a hair and went through the wall of the room instead. After that, the fun evening was over for the three men. Trent grabbed the gun and took it back to his car, then provisionally sealed the bullet hole in the wall with toothpaste. Tim and Lance then went down to the hotel bar. None of the three went over to room 348 to see if the occupant was okay. None of the three could bring themselves to check on Greg Flanagan and possibly save his life. The three later stated that they only really realized what had happened the next morning when the police arrived at the hotel. Lance Mueller, who fired the shot accidentally, is sentenced to 10 years in prison for the manslaughter of Greg Flanagan. In court, Greg's widow Susie addresses the following words to him. "You would never have come clean. You murdered him. No, you didn't go to him with the intention of murdering him. But you murdered him with every lie you told, with every intentional selfish deception, with every cover-up over and over again. You saw his body being carried out of the room in a body bag the next day. You knew you killed him. He meant nothing to you." The case of Greg Flanagan is more than tragic, and at the same time an excellent example. It shows that persistent and good police work can pay off, just like a new perspective on a case, as here with the help of private investigator Ken Brannon. Although the case seemed almost unsolvable, everyone eventually solved it. The Beaumont police, the tenacious private investigator, the medical examiner who was willing to admit his previous misjudgments, and also Greg's widow Susie, who brought the private investigator on board. They all contributed to the fact that Greg Flanagan's death could be solved and avenged. A kind of justice that every person harmed by a crime deserves. I look forward to reading your comments on this case. What surprised you the most? And do you think the verdict of manslaughter is appropriate? By commenting, you also support the channel. A like also helps. And if you want to see regular true crime content from Insolito, feel free to subscribe to the channel and check back for the next video. Otherwise, there's not much more to say. I wish you a good morning, afternoon, or evening, or whenever you watch the video, and hope to see you again in the next video. Until then, ciao guys.